Welcome to the WarriorHER Podcast, a show dedicated to those looking to excel in business, life, and family. I'm Courtney.
And I'm Nikki, and we're sharing the stories of remarkable women making their mark on the world, sharing the valuable lessons they've learned and the wisdom they've gained along the way.
'Cause even when I lose, I'm winning. 'Cause even when I lose, I'm winning. 'Cause even when I lose, I'm winning. 'Cause even when I lose, I don't ever take it now. I don't ever take it now. I don't ever take it now. I don't ever take it now.
Welcome to the WarriorHER Podcast. Today, we are thrilled to have a remarkable guest, Dr. Shara Ally, joining us. Dr. Shara is an esteemed doctor in nursing practice and earning her psychiatric nurse practitioner degree in just a few weeks. She's an entrepreneur and advocate for mental health and women's empowerment. She's the founder and CEO of NEUROorganics Inc, and an organization dedicated to holistic mental health and well-being. With a wealth of experience in psychology, business, and nursing, Dr. Ally's journey is both inspiring and transformative.
She's also known as Miss Canada United World 2022, a TEDx speaker, and cancer care ambassador at Grand River Hospital. Dr. Ally has made significant contributions to her field through her innovative approaches and insightful perspectives, breaking down stigmas associated with mental health and promoting resilience and empowerment among women. Her work has been featured in prestigious publications like Forbes, Vogue magazine, and Women of Influence. And now she is here with Nikki and I on the WarriorHER Podcast. So welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We are so happy to have you.
Thank you.
For those of you who are listening, actually, it was really interesting. We were going to have her amazing friend Shara.
Yes.
And she was like, I think she might be just a better fit right now. So thank you, Shara, for that.
Thank you.
Love Shara.
Plug and such an incredible woman like yourself. Like, we're super honored and excited to have, really and truly, like, I mean, I know that might be like, we say that and we have a lot of great people, but it's always truly our honor to be able to share like your story and what you're doing in the world with anyone who's listening to our show. So we're really happy that you're here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I mean, I'm no Shara. I'm going to admit that right off the bat. She's amazing. But I'm so thankful that she was able to connect us because I think it's always great for women to support women. So
yes,
here we are.
We are so aligned there, 100%, especially with mental health too. That's really big for us. And speaking of that, we definitely want to kick it off and talk about the importance of mental health, which I know we all value here together. Can you share with us your perspective on why mental health awareness is crucial, especially in today's society?
Yeah, I think that's a question that I think a majority of people could even agree upon on, no matter where you're coming from in a sense, because mental health is really something that you can't graduate from. You can't leave at home while you're on vacation with your kids, your partner, whatever. You take it with you. And so just like your physical health, if you want that six pack, you got to work for it. And, it's
Right.
kind of the same thing with your mental health, honoring your authentic self and whatever you may have been born with, you might have acquired in this thing called life, or you might just be experiencing, I think is just half the battle. Because I think a lot of the time we almost have this dark side to us. Actually, the psychoanalyst Carl Jung speaks of this. He's like the grandfather for it, about doing a lot of shadow work. It's that work that we're almost ashamed of, probably from, being a young child, like society, family, culture, religion, kind of saying, don't do that, and kind of shaming this sort of quote unquote side to us. And that side to us, though, is actually a part of who we are. And the more we suppress it, the more it comes out in different ways that makes us, either really anxious or avoidant and all these other, perspectives. So I think it's just really good to accept who you are to its fullest degree and, just put everything else aside, because I think that's when you start to attract what is meant for you in life and also start to deject what's no longer meant for you?
Oh my gosh, that is like, I am so there with you. Definitely been there. It's been a journey. I think, like growing up, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on like mental health in my family, unfortunately. So it was definitely something I had to learn to adopt and kind of grow into as I became an adult. I feel like it's always been super important, but I feel like, with the influx of social media and having access to the internet, people have been able to really, start making that a more important in their lives. I think it's a lot of stigma, around mental health, unfortunately. So I am right there with you, sister.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I'm right there with you too. And I think too, and I don't know, and maybe this could be debatable, but even with the stigma, at least in North America, I'll speak broadly here. This is not for everybody, but I do think the stigma is being reduced in comparison to, like, let's say 5-10 years ago. But with that being said, like Nikki, you made such a good point about social media. It's actually becoming so much more apparent how our responsibilities have to shift with the algorithms that we expose ourselves to.
Ooh,
so,
yes.
Right? Like whatever you put in your feed, your phone always is listening to you. It's going to produce whatever you put out there. So in a way, if you want to metaphorically provide a comparison here, it's sort of like manifestation in a way, whatever you say, whatever you think, whatever you're searching, it's going to find you on your phone. It's so well tailored that you have to be, I think, that much more thoughtful about how you use your brain.
Yeah, so a man thinketh. That is so true. So true.
Yeah, we're curating, we're curating. So it's like why we were recently having a discussion like this, but it's like if you, talk to somebody and they're like, oh, there's so much terrible things going on in the world and that's all I see. And I'm like, that's probably because that's what you're looking at. And so if that's what you're watching and that's what you're seeing, then that's what you're going to get constantly on social media, on Facebook, right? Like on all those platforms. Like it's like mine is like food, like recipes, fitness, and like business and like women's things, like anything dealing with like women fitness or women, psychology, mental health stuff. That is what the majority of my feed is. And that's very intentional because I don't watch the news. I don't try to take in anything that's going to add to my stress. Like I was diagnosed with PTSD. And so I have to be really intentional with like what I'm watching. And it can be very triggering, like something that might not bother somebody normally. For me, it's like, it can really throw me when I just hearing it. So I definitely get that.
For sure.
What are some like common signs though of like mental distress that people may overlook? Like how did that relate to being like 24/7 on social media?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I don't want to say that there's a concrete answer because I think mental health is it's such a wide area of medicine that's still needing a lot of research. So I'm going to start there.
Yes.
Like if we compare it to cardiology or oncology, there's like a lot of hard testing and things like that. Like we're just beginning to learn, and I'm learning this a lot through my current studies, about like genetic testing and like is there an opportunity for MRIs and things like that to see how the brain's operating, for preventative medicine, let's just say. So there's a lot of research in this field that needs to be done. With that being said, though, the reason why, in addition to the research that still needs to be done, I think also too, it depends on, I'm going to start with genetics. If, you have a family history of XYZ, diagnoses in the family, and that can range from substances to mental health, whatever it might be, then you're at a greater risk naturally, right, of having a mental illness. And then you throw in your environment. So depending on the environment you grew up in, the family dynamics, the family structure. Exactly. And then you throw in politics and religion and culture and all these sorts of things. It helps to also shape that, our system. And so in our mental health and in its capacity. So when you pair those plus then our life experiences, like Courtney even just said, you know, and so courageously sharing that she has PTSD, that comes with exposure, right?
Yeah.
Of something that's happened in her life that has internalized as PTSD. So those three components really already position us as being vulnerable. And we're living in a society right now where it's like be vulnerable, but then also be hyper independent. And so to be vulnerable, I find that, you know, and even talking to some of my friends and things like that, like even at a very like natural, non-clinical level, people are kind of finding their vulnerability in the posts that they're looking at, but the vulnerability is actually a comparison that they often do, or being hyper positive. You know, like you got to almost find that balance a bit in order to not just feed yourself with goodness, and you might also just be revalidating your own toxic traits sometimes, you know, because life is about growing and learning and all these sorts of things. But then it does place a higher level of responsibility that I don't think that we've been taught how to use on these tools. I think it's just like a free for all. Like, okay, great, go for it. And, you know, where our vision is just so powerful. It's the first thing that makes a judgment with less than 2 seconds to go, you know? And so, and that actually came from a Yale study that I spoke about in my TEDx. And, you know, depending on the post, you judge it so quickly for how attractive it is, how trustworthy it is, how competent you think it is. And so when you pair our vulnerability to our own senses, plus those other factors I just said earlier, it's almost like social media is fantastic, but you must outline boundaries with it, I'll say, because without that, you're already so vulnerable to the amount of content out there. And if you don't kind of have an algorithm that you can tolerate, you're going to cause yourself more pain than you expect. And I was reading a study, I think just a couple of years ago, actually. So maybe the data has changed, but they said that a person that their typical lifespan that where they would endure amount of pain in a lifetime is what we get on a daily basis now because of social media.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. And oh man, that is crazy.
Yeah.
That is really insane. Like, and with that, like to that point, you know, like what would be some, you know, strategies or practical things that, you know, people can put in place in their life to kind of curtail that or to kind of help them maintain a better mental health and well-being overall?
I think that's a good question. I think, you know, going back to evidence-based practices like good old therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, you can never go wrong with, you know what I mean? You don't necessarily need a diagnosis for this. It's proven, it works, you know what I mean? And I think too, just not forgetting to listen to your five senses. And even your sixth sense, which would arguably be like your intuition. And, you know, I met the Dalai Lama a few years ago when I was in India, just before COVID. And I asked him, like, what are we doing wrong in the West Coast, like in the Western part of the world? Like, you know, everybody's so anxious, depressed, all these sorts of things. And he just started laughing. And he just said, your sixth sense, your intuition, like your gut will not lie, you know? And it's like, it's true. So while you're getting therapy and you're talking to your girlfriends, you're getting everybody else's opinions, you must have an opinion about yourself. And in order to have an opinion about yourself, you need to start listening to yourself first and trusting yourself, those red flags, green flags, whatever, you know, listening to yourself so that you actually have an opinion on something before you're just going to search for other people's thoughts and opinions, because everybody's coming from their own perspective, their own walk in life, and they may not be wrong or right, but now you just have a bunch of thoughts that you don't know what to do with. And now you're overly stressed. And now you're going to look on Instagram or whatever for validation. It's like, it's a vicious cycle. You know,
that is so true. Oh man, I feel like I've had that conversation so many times over the last several years, especially like, you know, being in the corporate world. I work in the corporate world right now, and there's so many like, you know, political politics, like work politics that you have to like try to navigate, and it's like you feel like you're like two people. You know, you're on when you're at work and then you're home, and then you're also still having those social media influences So it's definitely important to check in with yourself. I think that is so valuable for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you share some success stories from your work at NEUROorganics that highlight that impact of addressing mental health?
Yeah, so in neuroorganics, we do a lot of education about the conscious and subconscious mind. And what I mean by that is, you know, the subconscious mind is kind of where we operate most out of, maybe even unconscious mind, arguably. And so the subconscious is always collecting data. It's like your heart, it's the motherboard. It's always collecting data. That's why genetics, environment, your algorithm becomes so important, because, your conscious mind, if we're lucky, we're operating out of this, like, I'm going to say like 5% of the day. This is like the person you want to be when you meet strangers, job interview, first date, all of that first and newness. This is the person we want to be. And this is best behavior, more likely than not. But who we really are is this person. And this person either grew up in an environment that developed an anxious type, an avoidant type, and then there's this mismatch. And what I mean by that, let's just say hypothetically, you're dating somebody, right? That's the honeymoon phase. Everybody's on their best behavior. And then let's just say like 2 years in, it's like you maybe the first, during the honeymoon phase, you were making breakfast, you're making up your bed, whatever. And then all of a sudden, now everybody's comfortable. And you almost, without even consciously being aware of it, revert back to who you are, who you really are. And all of a sudden, you don't do those things anymore. And then you start to hear people saying like, oh my God, you're not the person I met. You're not the same person that I was dating. Who are you? And it's because there's oftentimes this mismatch between like these two brains, I'll call it. And so with that mismatch, we do a lot of work in just trying to understand how, like, what somebody's attachment style is and how to get them to a secure attachment style. Because, we're all, even a secure person has, avoidant and anxious tendencies at its best. But at the same time, it's all about the resolve. And I think that's where we fail. We fail very, very big. And it's actually, I don't know what came first, it's the chicken or the egg. But what I mean by that is that conflict is okay. And I feel like we need to normalize conflict so long as it's like, I would say like not abusive and things like that. But it's not actually about the conflict. It's about how you resolve from the conflict. And in that resolution, it gives people the opportunity to do better. We're not going to get it right the first time, maybe not even the second or third time, but give us a chance to do better for each other. And I think that's how you start to build healthier relationships with other people in your life, but also with yourself. And people that love you the most, that's why they kind of say, the people that you love the most will hurt you the most. Sometimes they give you the real scoop about who you are, and you have to kind of choose if you want to internalize that and shift or not. And a lot of the times when we're delivering that information to one another, the reason why we have a hard time sometimes listening to it is because it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Ooh, I say that all the time. Oh, that is like one of my big phrases. Because people pick up on that tone. It's more than like just the words you say. And I feel like that is something that's often like missed, like when you're reading text messages. Because you're like trying to guess what the tone was. And a lot of things can be missed in translation. So, wow, yeah, that rung a bell for me. And I wanted to also, like, before we move on to the next question, you were kind of alluding and speaking to like the attachment styles. Some of our listeners may not be familiar with that. Like I've been able to and been blessed to kind of learn more about attachment styles, what they are, and how that relates to our life and how we grow up and all in our environmental influences. But could you I know it's like a whole broad thing, but if you could give people kind of like a little quick overview of what they are, just so they can understand like what you're meaning when you're speaking to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and a lot of psychologists, social workers, therapists, like they're very, it's a well-versed area. And I think it's a brilliant area really, because it explains so much about human behavior. So you have like an anxious attachment style where you're basically like, this is the best metaphor I can give across the attachment style. So as a young person, let's just say in the anxious attachment style, let's just say you were hurt, something happened, and your parent, let's just say you needed a 60-second hug to feel secure. But the parent went from 60 seconds to 90 seconds of a hug. All of a sudden, it's like a smothering, if I can call it that. So then they kind of grow up that like anytime something doesn't go right, or they're not supported, or they fail, or they're rejected, it becomes this overwhelming feeling where, because that over attached, security, I'll call it, that extra 30 seconds did not allow them to cope on their own. And now they're so dependent on, oh my God, okay, if you don't stay with me, who else is going to want me? I don't want to have to do this again. Like it's like an anxiety that it's almost chronic in a way. It's where they kind of stay.
Like a codependency on that in a way.
A little bit, yeah. And I want to be very clear. It's not a diagnosis. It's an attachment style.
Right.
Exactly. And so they're almost like, exactly what you just said, Nikki. It's like a codependency. They might even just be latching onto their partner, like somebody fix me. Oh my God. Like, oh my God. And I find these are also sometimes the folks that are always waiting for the shoe to drop, And then I'm going to skip secure for a second. I'm going to go to fearful avoidant. That's where you have anxious and avoidant tendencies. So let's just say in that 60-second hug, the child got 30 seconds of the hug. Let's just say. That means they feel somewhat secure because they got some validation from mom and dad, but then it became, or parents, I should say, but then it became that extra 30 seconds. What do I do? And it's almost like, and sometimes it's the simplicity of like, they might see somebody fighting or like in the home or something. And they're just like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? And they're like, just go to your room. Like there's just no explanation. And, little people, young people, they're still people, and humans thrive off of the because, and especially children, they're so curious. They want to know everything. And so when that child is then sent to their room and they're just like hyperventilating, and they're like, it's a lot of emotion. And, at that time, your parents, your teacher, whoever, they're like God to you, whatever they say, obviously is right in a way, because our brains are not fully developed. Our frontal, lobe and cortex, like none of that's developed to almost we're 30, and that holds a lot of our emotional regulation and understanding. So when they go to their room, they start to attach to things that do not have to emotionally reciprocate. Maybe let's say pets, TV, video games, things, space, time, finance. And so that extra 30 seconds where nobody was, validating or just kind of being there for them, they self-soothe through things that don't have to reciprocate in terms of emotion. And fearful avoidants are more prone to becoming the emotional parents in the family, because they're known as like the rock in our society, where they give, and they will take the bare minimum and be like, okay, so let's just say they bake a cake for somebody, and the cake is like, they literally will pour their soul into the cake. Like that's the extra ingredient, their soul, like their heart, their soul. And then, they're making this cake, whatever, good. And then they serve the cake and their feelings get really hurt if you don't validate the cake at all. And they will also be okay with like, oh yeah, this was good. Or like just a very small level of appreciation.
Without that reciprocity of how much they've poured into it.
Exactly, because they just want to keep the peace.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing for fearful avoidance. And you also see people with fearful avoidant tendencies. They're the people too that after a breakup, they're like, hey, do you still want to be friends though? Because they're always just trying to keep the peace. They are our harmonizers, but no, everybody goes to them when they need things, but nobody really checks in on them because they just look like they have it all together.
Yeah.
So they're at another risk for themselves. And then you have dismissive avoidance. So in that 60-second hug, so we went from 90 seconds to 30 seconds to like, I don't even know what to call it here. Let's just say 10 seconds, if that. That's when the guardians or teachers or whoever, it's like they don't even have room to be fearful or anxious, because what happens is that, as we know, they go up to the room, they attach to things that don't emotionally reciprocate. So it makes them like super avoidant, and they just dismiss any emotional output because they don't have the capacity. Practice makes progress. And the thing that people have to understand with avoidant tendencies is that when they're trying to self-soothe, in order to self-soothe, they must repress their emotion and cope by numbing it and then replacing it with those things that don't emotionally reciprocate. And so if you're ever going to be friends with a dismissive avoidant or date them, they're actually lovely people. All of these attachment styles are. But when your subconscious is just ridden with that attachment style, it's not even like they're doing it on purpose, you know, like sometimes like after a first fight or something like that, if a dismissive avoidant will push you all the way back because they kind of only know happy or angry. Any range of emotion between is kind of like foreign. Like, what is this, you know, because in their defense, they never got to practice that, you know, with people that could safely guide them through that. And so all that to say, you know, the ideal attachment style is secure, where you know, you can lean on others safely. That's where we call our support systems, but you can also lean on yourself. Yeah. And I just want to make it very clear that, you know, and we see it all the time. People can be so secure in their job as a family member, but then in relationships, maybe they're more anxious. Maybe they're more fearful avoidant. Maybe they're more dismissive avoidant. And that's why, you know, I kind of always say you can't read about gelato, you got to taste it. So I'm a big proponent of like going out there, trying the new friendships, trying the dating, trying the new jobs and things like that, because and learning how much you can sustain in it, and using, you know, therapy, your support system, social media, I suppose, to learn how to cope. Because if you don't, then you're just going to repeat the cycle over and over and over again, which is often unsafe until it's not.
So good. Thank you for that breakdown. Like she covered all that in like 5 minutes, y'all. Like kudos. That is a very expensive thing. And so kudos to you too, you know, using metaphors and like a story. His TEDx, like that's like one of the best ways. And I know a lot of people probably saw a little bit of themselves. And I know I did. I was like, oh Lord, maybe I gotta revisit that one for myself.
I do too, don't worry.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is also possible to have a little bit of each of them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In any different scenario. Courtney's loving this, by the way. She's a behavior analyst.
Oh yeah. I mean, my background is in behavior analysis, so I'm definitely familiar.
Girl, so you know.
Yeah. I was like, yes, learn and new and yeah. I mean, well, we learned about like John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, but who were the like originators of that. But
exactly,
it wasn't something we went into extensively, like because we were behaviorism, so slightly different. But it is really fascinating to me for all the theories, and I also I crave information. Yeah. So for me, it's like how do I take in this information and look at it objectively, and then take what I need from it and apply it for myself, or how I can improve. Because I also think that sometimes, like now I have a teenage son, so I also look at like how I feel like they have so much like awareness and information that sometimes I also wonder if that is detrimental, because they get little bits and pieces on social media of a theory or an attachment style and somebody creating content about it. And it's like, but it's so much deeper than that. Mm-hmm. Like there's such a deeper scope to like the attachment theories versus like this one sentence that was posted on someone's TikTok or something, you know? So it's like, I just think about those things too.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. Good for you. You're raising a teenager. That's amazing.
We talk about like the teenage generation quite a bit actually. And
we've had interns and stuff too. So it's like we want to understand, and our families did the same thing, right? Like they thought we were lunatics, like, oh, millennials, they're you know, they have their thing. I don't want to be one of those parents. Like I don't like, oh, my like teenagers these days, or it's like, no, but what are they teach us a lot. Like my son definitely mirrors and teaches me a lot, but also I'm like concerned with like their generation a little bit.
I think every generation that's not teens is always concerned about that generation. Like I remember, I can't even imagine being a teenager now. I don't even think I liked it when I was a teenager. Like it's a hard time in life to figure what it is. Oh, and you feel like you have to get it all together, like at such a young age, which is not realistic at all.
No, I don't think so. I definitely don't. And then it's just highlighted because you get to see everyone else and their mother out, and you're like, oh, well, they have this and they went there.
There's a lot of comparison, which can
Yeah.
also be detrimental, especially when you're a teen and you're not fully developed. You don't really know a lot about life. You know what I'm saying? You still have so much to learn and grow, but you think you do at that time.
Yeah.
And so it's a rough time.
And it's such an opportune time to, and pivotal time to individuate. Because if you don't, that's where you start to reinforce these attachment styles, right? Much more. And I think for, like, I'm personally not a parent, but Courtney, I imagine for parents that can be really scary because there's risk. There's risk in letting go and removing some of the controls and letting them make mistakes that you don't know how far the mistake can go, right? So it's a fun balance.
Parameter.
Yeah.
Always a teeter-totter.
I don't know if there's balance. I think I have 4 kids, by the way, all very
good for you. Oh my God.
And they all at different stages too.
All at very different ages and stages.
How do you have time for this conversation today?
Almost an adult and toddler.
Oh, you got babysitters.
Sort of. That's another. That's probably
they can come knocking on the door.
My attachment theory. No, but they're with dad anyway. They're with dad.
Oh,
but yeah, like it's. I don't think it's so much about balance. I've come to realize it really is like continuously learning and like having to like reiterate and say, well, I used to do this, or like I'm not, whatever I am doing is not working. Like it's like a continuous research study that never stops.
I think that's actually so accurate. I love that. I love that.
You're like, this was my hypothesis and I'm implementing this and it's literally not working in my favor, but you as the researcher want it to work in your favor.
Yeah.
So you feel like it should work, but it's not working. So you have to like pivot.
Yeah. That is hilarious.
Especially because you're so invested because it's your kid.
Yeah. Seriously. It's like when you're I'm sure there's somebody who's listening. You probably understand this as somebody who looks at evidence-based practices and understands research, right? That's what we do as clinicians, as scientists, as people who are interested. You're going into it with the hope that it's going to have the outcome that you want, right?
Of course, yeah.
Oftentimes, that's not what happens. And usually you learn something else. So I feel like that's parenting in a nutshell. It's like I have realized maybe the method of this is not working. And all of my training goes completely out the window when it comes to my kids. Like
that's the epitome of practice makes progress though. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's the epitome of it. And I think too, and I think that's just so honest and so humble of you to even say, because to be a parent, sometimes I feel like there's such a high standard that they can have in their mind when it's just humans just trying to raise humans, you know what I mean? And I think too, in understanding attachment style, if you truly understand attachment style, I think then, I think a lot of these feelings, and I'm not going to say that they don't exist at all. Maybe initially they might when you're going through a grief cycle, let's just say a breakup or whatever. But like those emotions of like hate, jealousy, envy, all of these quote unquote negatives, I suppose they call it, although they don't need to be negative depending on how you use it. And I say that because it's okay to have a range of thoughts and emotions. But if you really understand attachment style, it's really hard to fall into those chronically and for the long term. Why do I say that? Because there's a level of understanding and forgiveness. It doesn't mean you necessarily go back to that person or you become friends with them or you go back to that workplace or whatever, but you don't hold it in your heart anymore because all of a sudden it's actually not always about you. Yeah. Sometimes it's that attachment style getting in that person's way, and you're hurting because you might love that person or whatever the case is, but man, they're devastated too, and people with insecure attachment styles. So anxious, fearful, avoidant, dismissive, avoidant, there's no such thing as self-sabotage. It's what your subconscious does to protect you. That's what a trauma response is. And they think, and that trauma response was intelligent at a time that you needed to respond that way. Right. But today, when you're, let's just say, in different situations, maybe, your life has shifted and all of that good stuff. That's why I say practice makes progress, so that you see what you like and what you don't like. You no longer need to respond that way. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. Give people a chance to show that they can shift and change. They're not going to be perfect at it, but we're all dealing with this subconscious mind and even unconscious mind. So that's it lessens the burden, that emotional burden that I think so many of us carry, and we don't understand why.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. So I would like to really know how your experience learning about like Eastern approaches to mental health care, especially, kind of referencing that initial meeting with the Dalai Lama. How has that influenced your work?
I mean, I love it. I think it's interesting because so I had a fellowship in my doctorate program back in 2019, which feels like forever ago. Like, that was before COVID. I'm just like, oh my God, I can't even remember what happened since COVID. I feel like I sometimes still don't even know the year. I know it's 2020.
It's just pre-COVID and post-COVID. Like the years were like nothing. It was like pre and post.
Well, it's tough is because I'm also a professor, and like a lot of my nursing students and things like that, like they're seeing the COVID rise again. So I'm still in the conversation of COVID constantly. And so, which is not a terrible thing, but sometimes I'm like, wow, it's just that word that you just don't want to hear anymore. Remember, everybody thought 2020 was going to be their year. And like, I don't know about you guys, it was not mine. So
absolutely not.
But anyway, all that to say, so when I was in India on my fellowship in 2019, it was actually an international fellowship. So it was just professors and just really, really esteemed people from all over the world that came together. And the journey started off in such a beautiful way in meeting the Dalai Lama, getting to like ask him questions, and and he was just really like a wonderful sort of being to be in the presence of, and just starting to tap into understanding and I did ask him, what are we doing wrong? And like I said earlier, he just started to laugh, and he really emphasized the need to tap into your intuition. And I think sometimes the way that we're raised in this part, like in North America, let's just say, it's so hyper focused in on having to work, go to school, get married, have a family. Whereas if you go to Europe and things like that, or South America, they have time for rest. They have time for family. They have time for spirituality. Like here, people wait to retire and then get anxious when they're retired. Like, you know what I mean? It's faulty in a way. So anyway, so learning from the Dalai Lama and learning how to tap into our own senses, our intuition really, really was helpful in our guidance, in my guidance, I should say. And then learning about how they just kind of naturally heal within themselves, their social support systems, using that intuition. Now, I will say that what I think we do phenomenal in the Western world, like North America, is that we accept a lot of these principles, maybe not as readily because of our developments in medicine, but we are also very well versed in diagnostic criteria and knowing that it's okay to have a mental illness diagnosis. Whereas maybe in other parts of the world, they're still working on that stigma work. And so that fusion of the two really make a really beautiful marriage in a way, because then you're accepting both parts that might need attending to.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we were
they dropped the line.
Yeah, we were in Tulum with this. We were in Tulum recently, a couple months ago. And I feel like that is like they do such a beautiful job at like, I feel like more balanced.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever really fully believe in full balance, but prioritizing, I guess, like prioritizing yourself and your rest and recovery, as well as like, yeah, we work, but like work is not the focus of our entire existence.
Right. Exactly. And I think too, even in the practice of, let's just say, an alternative medicine would be yoga. It's highly popularized. However, I was actually just speaking to a colleague of mine who's in my program, and she works very closely with a lot of yogi gurus. And she's also East Indian or South Asian, I suppose would be the correct term. And she said, like, the way that even hot yoga is technically not allowed to be in a room that's heated. It doesn't allow you to actually connect with yourself, like your intuition and everything else in your body, like head to toe. I'm not speaking as eloquently about this as she is at this time, but you know, it's also understanding that these practices just go back years and years and years ago that have been so perfected and tailored to who we are. And in our side of the world, we seem to capitalize on it. Yeah. So it's the simplicity and techniques that we shift and don't always acknowledge the underpinnings of that. So even with intuition on the Western side of the world, we can argue, okay, yeah, there's, you know, your gut is filled with like so many neurons that's always activating, and that leads, then gut health and mental health go hand in hand. But in understanding how to use that, I think comes with, and I'm not even speaking about somebody who has a diagnosis, right? Just everybody on a whole. That goes hand in hand with understanding your attachment style. If you don't understand this, you can't trust your gut, whether that be your intuition or gut health, whatever you want to call it. You just can't. And then you start to make decisions that are based on the opinions of other people or out of fear. That's what I'm saying. There's no such thing as self-sabotage. It's protection.
Wow.
So
y'all are getting some free sessions today. We all are.
Yeah. So I mean,
let's talk
that
about
is a lot, but I want to know like two more things. You talked a lot about like the community, but just even when you were referencing the person that you were referring to with the yoga, how do you measure the impact of your work on the individuals and the communities in which you're serving?
That's a great question. So I work with folks either on an individual basis or on a group basis. And I always say to them, you are the CEO of your own life, and I'm just your quarterback. I'm just here to provide you with the education that you can choose to use or not use, right? Depending on where you're at with things. And also too, to feel free to use it in conjunction with other forms of treatment, whether that be medication for you, CBT, DBT, any sort of therapy, your support system. Don't feel like you have to isolate your health options. You should be doing it in conjunction with other things. But also too, it's almost like there should be a level of a self-assessment of feeling a bit more free from the burdens of the subconscious and being a little bit more conscious in how you make decisions and not just going into autopilot. And we don't even notice that we're going into autopilot. So it does take an incredible amount of work and strength and responsibility to get to this point where you can actually work on your attachment style. And it's not that it's not for everybody, but it depends on where they're at in their healing journey and the level of acceptance that they're going to have for maybe the traumas that they've been through, the people that have hurt them, and more importantly, how they have showed up in that conversation or that situation. Because the whole point about attachment style is, at the end of the day, and nobody loves this, I haven't met one person that's like, yeah, Shara, this is great, looking at yourself in the mirror. Because at the end of the day, you only have control on how you internalize information and respond to it. That's it. That's when, right? Like, you only know that you're making progress once you start to see that you are in control. That's so key.
Man, powerful. That's powerful stuff. And, to that point, when it comes to NEUROorganics, what are some of your future goals with it? And are there, as we're like kind of closing out, are there any upcoming projects or initiatives that you're particularly excited about? And then, finally, what message would you like to leave with our listeners, especially those, who may be struggling with their mental health, and how would you like to empower them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with NEUROorganics, like I said, if we could somehow get this education across the globe, I think that would be amazing. And like, you know, I think a lot of this work is already being done. And even if it's not through neuro, find a platform that works for you, because at the end of the day, maybe the way I deliver education is not going to be this. It's not going to resonate, you know, and that's why we have so many different types of educators in the world, and why we have so many people with different gifts. Find what works for you. Neuro is not meant to be selfish in any sort of way. It's meant for people that are ready to take action, I think, more so, and are ready to really look themselves in the mirror. Because I can, you know, like sometimes I'm like, yeah, but girl, like, let's just call a spade here. Did that happen or did it not? You know, like I'm one of those. And so that's what I'm saying. Find a platform that resonates with you. I would really encourage people to understand their attachment style. And like I said, it's not independent of if you have a diagnosis or family history. Don't ignore those parts of yourselves either. That's a part of who you are, and you should own it and be so proud. But in understanding this, I think it, like I just said, it just somehow provides relief for yourself, and it relieves burdens. And so for neuro, definitely would love to take it more international. We made a lot of like headway, but you know, I think a lot of people would benefit from this, because no matter where you are in life, we're not much different, you know. And I actually find humans to be 99% similar, and we all seem to fight about that 1%, which is unfortunate, I think, in a way. And so there's that. And in terms of something empowering to leave you with, I mean, it sounds cliche to say love yourself, so I'm not going to necessarily say that, but I'm going to say be vulnerable. Be vulnerable with yourself, and accepting this so-called shadow that Carl Jung speaks about, or this dark side, or that side that people always just kind of always said, you know, that's bad. Don't do that. You're stupid. You're not good enough. You're too this, too fat, too dark, too light, too smart. Just lean into your own vulnerabilities with yourself, so that when other people lean into you, you've created the space to allow it, and to also know when to step away safely without having to go to this extreme of ending a relationship, gossiping, you know, toxic work environment, whatever it is. Just accept yourself, and all of a sudden, all of the gossip, all of that other stuff just doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't, because you learned how to accept yourself. Therefore, you can accept others for who they are and choose how close they will be in your life.
Wow. I mean, mic drop. Courtney, you are muted.
Just kidding. Tell people where they can also find you and connect with you if they are interested. We'll include it in the show notes too, but
yeah. So NEUROorganics.com. There's also an email address, selfcare@NEUROorganics.com. And we also have an Instagram account at NEUROorganics, as well as Facebook as well. So there's a lot of different ways and methods. And like I said, if it's not neuro, that's fine. Just find something that allows you just to prevail in this place where we have to coexist in a hopefully a loving and caring way.
Well, you heard it. Thank you, doctor. I'm going to call you doctor, because
Dr. Shara.
Doctor. Thank you so much for your time. It's the one resource that we do not get more of. So I am eternally grateful that you decided to take any of your time out of your day to spend it with us. So thank you very much.
Yes, we're taking notes as we speak. I promise you.
Thank you both. I thought like that was actually just really nice just to have like a conversation about it. Just felt like we were just having like a cup of tea over, you know, just sitting together and just chatting. And I think that's exactly what we need to do more of. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the WarriorHER Podcast. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights from our incredible guests.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Follow us on all social media platforms to stay up to date. And remember, girls really do run the world.
'Cause even when I lose, I'm winning. 'Cause even when I lose, I'm winning. 'Cause even when I lose, I'm winning. 'Cause even when I lose, I don't ever take it now. I don't ever take it now. I don't ever take it now. I don't ever take a nap.